took only 7 days to cause a destruction that is close to about 60 billion rands.
The July incident was quite devastating.
No insurance organization was equipped for such an unprecedented event.
If we hadn't had Sasria, I think the country would be in a far worse state than we are at the moment.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first webinar of the Insurance Master Webinar Series, brought to you by Insurance Biz Africa and partly sponsored Sasria. My name is Nondutsuwo Noni Mhlungu, and I'm looking forward to being your host and moderator for today's discussion. The theme for today's session is around the importance of insuring against civil riots and unrest. And this, of course, is on the back of what was truly an unprecedented event in recent South African history. And I am, of course, talking about the civil unrest in 2021. And this truly shook the country. I mean, lives were lost, businesses closed down. We saw a lot of unrest happening during that period. And so we're really going to be at some of those insights. Some good news now, this session has been accredited for 2 CPD hours. So please be sure to stay on the session until the end of the session so that you are eligible for those 2 CPD hours. We're going to have the format of today is that we're going to have 3 speakers come on. After each speaker, we are going to have a short Q&A session. I do ask that you please pop your questions in the Q&A function of the chat, not in the chat function, but in the Q&A function of the chat. And then we will look at those if time does permit for us to do so at the end. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker. Mr. Themba Spear is the Executive Underwriting and Strategy at Sasria. A little bit about Themba. With over 20 years of service at Sasria, Mr. Spear brings a wealth of institutional memory, technical insight, and strategic foresight to this discussion. His leadership has been instrumental in evolving Sasria's underwriting capabilities and shaping the organization's strategic response during times of national crisis. Today, he's going to unpack the scale of the unrest, Sasria's claims response, fast-tracked interim payouts, the stakeholder collaborations, internal policy reforms, and the roadmap to a stronger and more agile Sasria. His topic today is entitled Sasria's Response to the July 2021 Civil Unrest, Challenges, Resilience, as well as the Road Ahead. Mr. Spear, over to you.
Good afternoon to all, and welcome to all the guests, and thank you for this opportunity to present to everyone else. So I'm going to talk to the issues that we've gone through, and I hope you'll find meaningful information from what I'm about to share with you. So yeah, let's start. So the content of our conversation today, as Onontutula has mentioned, will give you an overview of the July event, the impact, Sasria's exposure, fast-tracking choices that we made, the challenges with the wedding and the insurance lingo that we are using, and the reforms that we are undertaking internally. So if you look at the overview of this topic, we'll start by talking to the province where everything started. So KZN is located on the east coast of South Africa. It has a population of about 12.4 million people, second largest manufacturing hub. It's mainly Zulu speaking, around 4 million people in that area speak Zulu as the first language, and the average income per household is around 166K, and that 166K is below the national average. The province has been plagued by a number of wars taking place. My family used to live there. They left KZN because of the tribal wars that took place. And those wars have been going on for a number of years. So in as much as it is a beautiful province and South Africa's playground, it still faces the issues that South Africa is challenged with. There is unemployment, there's high levels of poverty and inequality, and most of the people live in semi-rural or rural areas, and with a few concentrated around the urban areas. The reason I'm painting this background is for you to also have a picture of how beautiful KZN is. And it has warm beaches, and it boasts access to the mountainous area and the flora and the fauna. It has deep cultural roots with the Zulu kingdom, and it hosts a number of museums and areas of interest. It hosts the Durban July and the Comrades Marathon. And for the ones that are young at heart, KZN is a playground, Durban rocks. If you look at the artists there, you can see that it is really a playground for most of the South Africans. But on a particular day on Wednesday, then we decided to send the former president to escort for him to start his sentence over contempt of court. And days prior to that, there's been persuasion and people trying to engage with the former president to say, look, present yourself to the Zondo Commission and make yourself available for questioning and answers. And he refused. And then he was also requested, and people were urging him to say, okay, look, go and start serving this sentence. And it became a push and pull. At some point, we were scared that the National Intervention Team or the Special Task Force will be there, and there might be, adverse things taking place at his homestead in Nkandla. Up until somewhere in the midnight, he agreed to go, and he was then escorted to the prison. That then sets us onto a snowball, because immediately, as people heard that the president is now incarcerated, things started snowballing, and around Thursday, messages were starting to flood the social media to say the president is there, and why should the president account? And the slogan at the time was "Wenzeni umsholozi." So as soon as we woke up around Friday, we then saw that Mpangeni started burning and Moy River tracks started burning. And it became a huge challenge, because the N3 is the nerve route for logistics and transporting goods for trade between Johannesburg and the Durban harbour. But that set then, things in motion, and things started happening, and people got excited, and damage took place. And by Friday, this impact and the destruction took place, and everyone else was in shock. I mean, if you look at the pictures, people were harvesting, were burning. We have Mr. Mercedes there, who was also used as an example of this thing. And a number of businesses were hit. So trucks were burnt, and all manner of losses took place. And in other instances, as I went down to KZN, I learned that in one factory, people attacked a cold storage, which was a meat supply area, and they took chickens there. And then just below that factory, there was Clover, and Clover has all the dairy products, yogurts, and fresh juices. And then next door to Clover, there was Heineken. And then a braai took place. And I think about 2 to 3 days, people were camping on the street, eating meat from the cold storage there, braaiing the chickens, getting to Heineken, getting the booze, and then getting to Clover to help themselves with the foodstuffs. But if you look at all the infrastructure, nothing was spared. If you go to Maritzburg, the blood bank was targeted. People looted blood. I don't know. Probably if this was happening in Pretoria, one would say people would be Bluetoothing themselves with that blood. But it happened in KZN, so we don't have Amapara and the Nyaupe guys in KZN. And then, as you thought that people have lost it, they went into a funeral parlor and also stole coffins. So you could see that people were opportunistic and taking anything and everything they can during that period. And at this point, on Friday, I need to point it out that SASRA had then gone out and said, we are accepting liability. These are SASRA losses. So everything that happened, the Blue Coach ladies, you can see that there was a national, outcry by the owners of this sofa to say this thing is required, and it became a famous sofa. And there were communities who said, look, not in our name. We are going to protect properties, and we are going to make sure that these things don't happen, which is the reason why the impact was not that much in the country, and the losses were limited to KZN and Gauteng. In Gauteng, mainly, we saw some organizations who stood at Maponya and said, that's not going to happen. And then we saw people in Limpopo who said, this is not going to happen. Mpumalanga, the same. Northwest, the same. Eastern Cape and Cape Town. And that is how, I should say, we were spared, because taxi drivers also started parking taxis in front of the malls and distribution centers and areas where they think that they might be looting, and to protect those properties. Now, what's interesting is that even though people protected these things, we also had those who took an opportunity to raid ATMs. And to our surprise, we paid a significant amount on ATMs for the damages to the ATMs and the money that was taken out of these ATMs. And the amount runs to multi-millions. And you can see that most of this thing was coordinated, because the raiding of ATMs, it's not someone who will just go there and just take money. So in as much as we saw random activities, but in my observation, there were instances where one could pick up that, this is planned and well orchestrated, and this is something that we need to take seriously as a nation. The irony of this thing is that FMCG was hard hit, and FMCG standing for fast moving consumer goods. Those consumer goods really move fast from the distribution centers, from the stores, from the malls, from any retail sector that was close to the people. Sadly, though, there is loss of life that took place, and this also raised issues around how people function between the communities and the neighboring communities. The Inanda issue and Kwamashu became topical because of the fatalities that took place between those two locations or townships. So sadly, people lost life, and unfortunately, there is no insurance, and SASRA does not cover loss of life. For anything else that I've shown in the previous pictures, most of the items there were insured. Now, as you look and move to the SASRA exposure, you will see that 80% of the losses took place in KZN and 20% in Gauteng. The estimated economic loss is around 50 billion. But when these claims were reported to SASRA, they were around 39 billion rands. And these losses shook the system. At the time, the executives had a bet to say, okay, this is going to be the limit of the exposure. And I don't think anyone won that bet because most of us were wrong with the estimates. And the challenge is that the economic loss of 50 and the reported simply means that there is 11 billion of uninsured properties, which talks to the gaps in terms of people buying SASRA and them being aware that they need SASRA cover. And that 11 billion was not recovered. I know at the time there was the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, there was Industrial Development Corporation, there was the Department of Labor. And when I did my site visits, I was traveling with representatives from those departments, and we're holding town hall sessions in most of the areas. And you could see that people were saying, yeah, I'm not insured, and how much is SASRA? And then you give them a premium estimate, and then they say, okay, but I could afford SASRA. And it really pained me to say, here is someone who's saying I can afford SASRA, but we don't have the product available for them. And they say, I don't want the other insurer, I just want you as SASRA. So it really pushes us to find those innovative solutions to try and make our product accessible. Now, KZN on its own, without looking into the combined losses with Gauteng, the graph is the same even if you include Gauteng. On the 9th, all the losses could have been within SASRA's available funds and reinsurance capacity. And then people go out on a Friday, they start touching a bit of trucks, and others visit a few retailers and break into those retail stores to take goods, and they break into a few distribution centers. And then this snowball started growing up until Monday. I think it's human nature where one sees that how my neighbor has a 54 or whatever inch or 65 inch television, double door fridge, the house is now fully furnished, and he's got groceries for almost a month. and he's got Christmas clothing. So why am I sitting here? And people started going out. And that is when things started getting really, really bad in the country. Up until the 13th, when the president came and said, okay, guys, emanyana, Vakabiki, and let's stop this thing. The SANDF was deployed, and you can see that with the deployment of the SANDF on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the other days, things started to quieten. But the loss had taken place in a number of areas. I mean, if you look at the locations, Edendale Mall, we went, the entire mall was gutted. You go to Brookside Mall, it was burnt. You go to Disdale, the client, it was burnt. You go to China Mall in PMB, it was also burnt. You go to Springfield, it was burnt. All these malls were burnt, and people couldn't have access. In some of the areas, we went to Dalton. They only have a spa there. That spa was burnt down. No, they only have a U-Safe. That U-Safe was burnt down. They only have F&B. That office or branch was burnt down. So they didn't have access to banking, didn't have access to SASA, didn't have access to food. And a school was also burnt down. So when we went there, people were paying around 40 rands to buy a loaf of bread, because with tragedy comes opportunity. So someone saw that, oh, these ones are hungry. So he would drive early in the morning to Pietermaritzburg, which is around 60 km, and then go to a bakery there, get food, comes back, and then sells the bread at a premium. The guy made a killing. But overall, a total of about 10,000 claims were received from KZN. But Sasria, if you look at its entirety, we received around 17,000 rands, 17,000 number of claims. These number of claims are 3 times or 4 times what we settle in a year. Even though we may say it is a bad year, I mean, when we get around 3,000 claims, we know that, okay, it was a bad year. Now to get 4 times that, then you know that the pop had really hit the fan and we were in trouble. Now look at the estimate. In Durban, we paid around 18 billion. Durban North, 100. Kotuguza, 100. Newcastle, 100. Umhlanga Rocks, about 37. And the concentration of these major losses was within those red dots there. And that is where we had those significant losses. The clients that suffered the most, you can see that there is a client where we paid 1.5 billion and another client we paid 1 billion. All the other clients, we paid them 500 million. So the client that we paid 1.5 billion, their loss was around 2.4 billion. The client that we paid 1 billion, their loss was around 2. The client that we paid 5.3, their loss was around 750. And the difference is that they bought coupons and bought a particular limit. And you can see that they anticipated or had a view that, okay, if things happen, this limit will be appropriate for our risk. And it's only a few clients that bought below what was required. Not everyone had under insurance. Now, the KwaMashu is a mall. That mall, people bent it, and then someone went to the fire extinguisher control room, switched off the fire extinguisher services. And what happened was that the building bent itself down for about 3 days or 4 days, up until the SANDF was present. If you recall, there is a picture where there were tankers positioned outside a mall. That mall was bent to its bare structures, like concrete. Everything else that is not concrete bent down to ashes. So how did we then respond as SASRA? Working through a network of agent companies helped us, because we were not going to respond appropriately. I can tell you that now, for one simple reason. At the time of July, SASRA had 5 claims controllers in the complex claims section. Now, if you look at the exposure of 39 billion of the claims that were reported against the 5, and against the 17 or 18,000 worth of claims, the team was not going to cope. So agent companies came in, and they volunteered to support us, and they were given mandates to settle claims, some up to 1 million, others up to 5 million rands. Then we applied the 80-20 principle. Anything that is below 1 million was the 80% in terms of the frequency of the claims. The 20% of claims that we dealt with internally accounted for 80% of the severity of the claims that we had to pay. So we can see that paying 20% of the claims, you probably estimate that SASRA had to pay around 20 to 25 million, and the industry paid the difference between the 32 that we ended up settling. So our stakeholders worked with us. Staff didn't resign. Normally, when things go pear-shaped, people look and want to secure their futures and say, the ship is sinking. I don't want to sink with it. Let me get on the rescue boat or the life-saving boat. People stayed, to be honest. We didn't have resignations at the time. Reinsurers didn't even think twice. They paid up front. As soon as they got the message that we've accepted liability, this is the exposure, the lead insurer and other insurers said, okay, SASRA, here's the money, start paying. The orchestration was obvious, and we had challenges now, because you know how things operate in SA. As soon as something happens in the country, then the social media space breeds a new level of analysts, and people start saying things that they should not be saying. And there was, social media feedback or comments that SASRA won't cope. They are not geared for this. They don't have the money. And we equated, in some instances, to some of the failing state-owned entities, as if it's us who said to the public, go out there and ban stuff and loot. The team internally, they said, okay, look, let's work. There's things that we need to fix. The economy of the country is at stake. And that was the main driver from all the claims people that participated. Other comrades had to be recalled from other departments to beef up the claims capacity. Those who were on maternity leave were called. Others who were in other departments who had pressed an escape from the claims department were also recalled. And people were told all hands on deck and let's work. Recruiting was a challenge. Not everyone out there is a complex claims controller. So it became a challenge to find people who have complex claims understanding and the understanding of asset policies. So whilst we were settling claims, dealing with the challenges of responding to the brokers, the agent companies, the reinsurers, clients themselves, the media, and everyone else, we had to also go out there and interview people. We interviewed people and we got a few heads and we started beefing up the team for us to be able to respond to these losses. The call for reinstatement was a selfish one because we said, look, if we give people cash, there will be no reinstatement and KZN will become a ghost town. So what we did at the time, we took a decision to say, if a building is burnt down, we're not prepared to pay any cash to the owners of those properties. We forced everyone to reinstate because if I were to get 200 million, happiness, I'll leave that building and pocket the 200 million, try to do something else and not bother myself with the troubles that come with July. And then the interim payments, those got us into trouble. We paid interim payments to a number of clients. But as you know, people talk and then you hear that you've paid an interim payment to one retailer and the other retailer then calls the broker and the CEO and say, yeah, we hear that so-and-so has been paid an interim payment and we have not been paid a cent. So why are we being treated differently? And for that retailer, I think when we looked back and we looked at where they were coming from, we were not at fault, but what made the payment of an interim payment to them difficult was that they operate their supermarkets more like a franchise. So if you had to pay any Pick and Pay or Boxer or whatever thing, it is easy because they operate as one unit, they have one coupon, but these other guys operate as tuck shops. Sorry to use that word. So we had to find strategies to say, okay, how do we then make these interim payments accessible to everyone, considering each and every client's individual circumstances, and to try and come to an aid to support all the businesses. Then we came up with a strategy, we agreed, and then we released those interim payments on a case-by-case basis. Now, the system came in handy, but it was also new. It was not tested. We had deployed this system in November. It was a brand new system. We worked during COVID and we said, okay, we're pushing to have this system in 2019, 2020, and we were deploying, went full speed ahead. During COVID, we put, our backs to the wagon and we pushed. By December 2020, we went live, migrated from the old system, God's grace, to this new system in December. Then we went on leave. January we came and we're now testing the system. And then whilst we're starting to add the bells and whistles onto the system, boom, July happens. Now this thing is being tested. And I must say, for what it's worth, it held its own at the time, and we're able to manage the claims and respond in a manner that we had to respond. Now, what also brought a challenge to this thing was that we were operating still under COVID restrictions, flying to KZN, getting loss adjusters around and talking to people and engaging. You still had to contend with some of the restrictions in terms of COVID, and that also created its own challenges. But we had to then look at beyond that and try to come up with a solution. So the challenges that we had in terms of the wedding were brought by this issue. SASRIA is a creature of statute. And if you look at these perils, this is not like you'd say accident and then, oh, okay, two cars collide. Then even if you read the first line, any act, whether on behalf of any organization, body or person or group of persons, calculated or directed to overthrow or influence any state or government or any provincial local tribe. Yeah. Now, then you ask yourself, okay, what are they saying here? You know? So this wedding, then it was tested. And it was tested because, number one, politicians went out there and started saying things that, hey, this is insurrection, this is what, this is what, this is what. And now we had to look and say, oh, Bagit, is this covered by SASRA? But when you look at peril 1, 2, and 3, you can safely say, oh, okay, yeah, man, even if we could have chosen one, this thing was calculated to influence a state or government. So, okay, it passes. Oh, peril 2, this thing was calculated to bring about damage in order to further a political aim or political objective. Oh, okay. Oh, so it was against a state or government or provincial local. Okay. So this thing qualifies there. If you look at peril 3, public disorder. But okay, but why public disorder? Oh, public disorder includes civil commotion. Oh, okay, this thing is civil commotion. So we ended up with civil commotion and saying these losses are classified as civil commotion. And that created calm in the country because there was so much confusion and people were trying now to be legal expertise and experts and trying to say whether this is covered by SASRA or not. And then the analysts were there, questioning every fiber of the organization and our capability. And people then started concluding on our behalf as if we didn't have a voice. And the learnings that we took out of July was that we have to be out there and not be this secret that is best kept by government, and ensure ourselves to be worthy of the task and that we know what we're doing and we understand our business. And I think by doing that and leading and saying, look, this is SASRA related, we accept liability, and these are our claims, and that gave confidence to the nation and gave confidence to businesses. And people said, okay, let's see you perform. Let's watch how you respond. So managing the perils became easy. We didn't have a lot to decide on. It was a bit easy there. We knew and accepted liability, and unfortunately, we weren't even on TV to accept that the liability on those claims. Anti-selection, we saw it. People did their own magic, and Murphy's Law, the one that you overlook becomes the one that bites your heel. And we saw that those who did selection and did their own things bore the brunt of their shortcuts. Basis of settlement became an issue, and we know that there are a few claims where we're still on litigation because of the issues of basis of settlement. The attach versus follow, I think it's a challenge that we've always had, and we attach to the underlying policy. But people assume that what the underlying policy says SASRA must do, and those are the things that became a challenge. This underwriting philosophy of non-refusable and non-cancelable, people bought cover when the next door neighbor's building was burning, and that becomes a problem. And the customer experience, we don't know how it was, but we tried to make sure that everyone gets the same, even though it was difficult to appease everyone at the time, but we tried to push and make sure. As a result of all of these things, the end of it is that all these challenges culminated to us saying, maybe we need to revisit our wording, and that is why we have the SASRA policy wording review now, to try and say, let's make sure that this thing is future ready, and we won't see these challenges if anything happens. So the internal reforms is we are building our own funds to 30 billion. I know it sounds ambitious, but we want to have 30 billion of our own money without reinsurers, without government, where we can say we will be able to respond to any eventuality because we are self-sufficient. We don't want to go cap in hand to the shareholder and ask for money. And personally, I feel like we can't place the burden of insurance on taxpayers. So we need to be seen managing this business appropriately and making sure that we're making the right decisions and right calls. Whether we introduce underwriting conditions, we increase rates, we buy additional reinsurance, but we must go above and beyond to make sure that we don't find ourselves knocking at National Treasury and to say we need a bailout. That is SASRA's executive management's decision, and management and the support of the board to say, let's make sure that we create an organization that is self-sustainable and that will not place a burden on the taxpayer. And to achieve that, we adopted a strategy in 2029, and it's informed by these pillars that we need to secure capital to run the business. So we need to create capabilities and find money to be able to respond to any SASRA eventuality. If SASRA happens tomorrow, if July reloaded, as you call it, happens tomorrow, we need to be able to respond appropriately. We need to come up with solutions, and we need to have sustainable growth, and we need to make sure that internally we create those capabilities to optimize performance and transform the industry. But what are the risk management activities that we are working on? We are engaging communities. SASRA is on radio. We are on publications. We've issued media statements and advertisements which says to communities, you do have a right to protest. You do have a right to raise your concerns to anyone, but you do not have a right to ban or damage someone's property. We are building the brand so that people know and understand us. When you talk about Sazra, people don't say, what? What's that? Oh, that one. So when you talk about Sazra, it must be like you talking and making reference to Coke. Everyone knows, oh, okay, there's Coke. But talking about Sazra does not mean that we need to give people license to go and ban stuff. At some point, when our MD accepted liability, then people said, no, don't worry. Let's go and ban. The CEO of Sazra said he will pay for these things. So we don't want that. We need to manage all these things so that people are equipped and they know that if they ban, jobs will be lost, infrastructure will be damaged, there will be loss of life, and basically uzolamba in simple terms. Consumer education becomes key in terms of the things that we are doing going forward, and we want to reduce the severity of claims by investing on data, and I'll talk to that part, and also the intelligence gathering. So when you look at Sazra going forward, if anything happens in the country, we don't want to be found not knowing what is happening in the country. Hence, we are investing in these partnerships. The Consumer Goods Council, we are partnering with them, and with the CSIR, we're monitoring sentiment analysis. So we know what's happening on X, and we know what's happening on social media, and we can pinpoint and know where the losses are taking. We are investing in our partnerships with Municipal IQ. We are partnering with Santam, partnering with the Institute for Security Studies and the Joint Security Cluster, and the universities. We are trying to be closer to them. Why are we doing that? It is because we want to get to this phase here. When you look at the map, at any given point, we want to be in a position to say, we know what is happening in the country, we know which police station operates there, we know which trucks are there, and we can be able to send alerts to everyone and say, change route, do this, do that, for us to be able to minimize and prevent these losses. So all these partnerships and these initiatives are geared to make us more proactive in the management of our risks, and to try and make sure that we respond appropriately and we are not caught napping like we were on July, and as if we didn't know that we insure SRCC and PVT. So like any other insurer that understands the weather patterns and stuff, we want to be the masters of political understanding, social fabric understanding, and we know that we will be geared and equipped to respond appropriately and be ahead of everyone else in preventing future losses. So yeah, this concludes my presentation, and thank you.
Themba, thank you so much for that comprehensive and candid presentation. I think a lot of us have a better grasp of exactly what happened in the aftermath, in the days and the weeks and the months that followed. So thank you so much for that. Themba, before you maybe just, I know you're not going to jump off, you are going to stay on. I do have one or two questions for you, and then I'll check the chat as well to see if we have got any questions in the chat. So you mentioned that there were about 17,000 claims, that you had to process, and that's truly astronomical. And you mentioned that this was 4 times more than what you ordinarily process in a year. I'm interested to know if, have all of these been processed given, the capacity that you obviously had at the time? It's 4 years on. Are there any claims still outstanding? Yeah, maybe just share a little bit around that.
Okay. Yeah. So about 80% of the losses were settled within 2021. Wow. And then 2022, we were just going through the mills of finalizing reinstatements, where there were a number of reinstatements taking place. What is left now is claims that are on litigation. And I think of the 17, we can count less than 5 claims that are on litigation. So we can safely say that within a period of 18 months, we were done with settlement of those losses.
Sorry, Renee, I just want to read your bio and just introduce you formally to everybody. Apologies about that. So Mr. Renier Kruger is a director at Lloyd Warwick International South Africa and one of the country's leading specialist loss adjusters with extensive experience in navigating some of the most complex and large-scale loss events in recent years. Mr. Kruger was directly involved in the aftermath of the July 2021 civil unrest. His expertise lies not only in technical claims management, but also in assessing risk complexity, coordinating stakeholder responses, and identifying systemic weaknesses in the claims process. So today he's going to walk us through the on-the-ground lessons from that historic period, touching on operational bottlenecks, assessing claims in a chaotic environment, and capacity shortfalls across the adjusting ecosystem. Mr. Renier, over to you.
Thank you, Noni. I haven't done a very detailed presentation because there's just too much damage and things to put in a presentation, but I will just quickly speak about 2 points. One of them is for the benefit of all the participants and the guests on this webinar who do not know who is a loss adjuster. I thought I'll just go through that quickly. And then I'll talk about the challenges for the loss adjusters or that we've experienced during the July 2021 riots. And on the first point of who and what is a loss adjuster, I thought I'll discuss a few points, but I came across a LinkedIn post this morning, actually from a fellow loss adjuster in the UK. He's Neil Wright, and he's the head of major and complex claims at Questgates. Is a loss adjusting company in Manchester, and I'm going to borrow from his short post on LinkedIn because that encapsulates what a loss adjuster is, and it reads like this: nearly every time I'm at a dinner party or a social gathering, I'm asked the same question that everyone seems to ask in such a setting: what do you do? And I always get the same reaction when I say loss adjuster. A nonplussed look and tilt of the head. Generally speaking, people have only heard of loss adjusters if one has been to your house or your factory when a fire or a flood or some loss occurred. But the scope of a loss adjuster's role and the types of claims we handle are just so much broader than that. And in his own experience, and also in my experience, some of these claims, it involves claims involving mines, power plants. He's got ice cream factories, shipping vessels, kidnappings, terrorism events. That's Sasria. Claims worth tens of millions of pounds or dollars or rands in South Africa. Every day is a different day, and every claim is different. And my experience is but a drop in the ocean of what's out there. Then importantly, he says, it's a crying shame that given how important insurance is to the economy, it literally would struggle to function without it. That the loss adjuster's role in the insurance jigsaw is so poorly understood, at least at consumer level. It's perhaps the reason why we struggle to encourage adjusters to enter the field, losing excellent graduates to areas like accountancy, banking, and law, because of that simple lack of understanding of what we do, and actually, in reality, how interesting our job can be. And this is the critical part. Adjusters are a vital cog in the insurance process, providing impartial technical advice to our clients, help resolve complex claims, helping clients to keep their claims promises. But it's not just technical prowess where we excel. Our soft skills, negotiation, communication, and organization all make a huge difference in reaching fair and prompt outcomes, whether that is navigating tricky coverage points or whether it is simply negotiating a fair outcome on a claim. We're there time and time again. And lastly, whilst technology is an increasingly important aspect of the future of our industry, it's people that make the difference. And on that note, I want to, as the Institute of Loss Adjusters and as a loss adjusters, as a community of loss adjusters, say thank you to SASRIA. And just, I mean, they must be commended, SASRIA, for dealing with these claims. And so do the loss adjusters. I think we've gone through a very difficult time during those riots. And I mean, we've worked together on so many claims. And it's just commendable what we've done and how SASRIA has, especially the claims team, has managed that situation and the challenges brought about by the July riots. Anyways, I want to then continue with that and then go into the challenges that we faced during the July 2021 riots. Nani, you've touched on that. One of the biggest challenges that we had was capacity. And we need to understand and put the July 2021 riot in perspective, because preceding the riots, we had COVID-19. And one would remember that it was the end of March that the lockdowns were announced and that the COVID-19 pandemic really sunk its teeth into the world, basically, global community. But the claims from COVID-19 came much later because there was litigation. And those court cases only got resolved towards the end of 2020. Whilst we were dealing with those COVID-19 claims, especially the business interruption loss adjusters, came the 2021 riots. And whilst those riots were ongoing, in April 2022, we had the KwaZulu-Natal floods. So we had three major events which soaked up all the capacity of the local loss adjusters. And it was very difficult in trying times to deal with the influx of claims during those times. One of the ways that one can alleviate that capacity is obviously to create or to upskill and bring more loss adjusters into the industry. But that's a long-term project. That doesn't happen overnight. The other option is to bring loss adjusters from other countries to assist us and to add capacity to the local loss adjusters. But there's a challenge in that. And there's a big disparity between the fees that we charge in South Africa and the fees that is charged if you convert it from foreign currency to South African rand by the loss adjusters in Europe or the United Emirates, areas like that where you can get extra capacity, but it's just simply too expensive, because if you convert their rates and fees into South African rand, it just gets very expensive. It's also difficult to employ other local experts. Loss adjusters has got a long-standing relationship with the insurance companies, particularly with SASRIA also. We understand the processes. We've gone through the procurement processes. We are generally vendors on most of the insurance companies' panels. And it's difficult to bring somebody else in who don't always understand the time frames that's involved, the whole way that insurance works. So that also a challenge to get capacity, to increase capacity of loss adjusters in catastrophe claim environments. That apart, if we go to the actual claims, there were several I mean, there's just so many complications and difficulties that came about, but ones that stand out is access to sites. Immediately after these riots, it was very difficult to get to sites. There was many of the roads were still blocked by communities, and you couldn't get to the sites easily. The other one is policy interpretations. Policy interpretations, specifically conditions like average, played a big role, and also the security costs. There were a lot of complications and complexity that came from the security cost clauses and the cover that's provided by SASRIA. SASRIA was very good and stood by their decision to only cover those costs from the 9th of July up to the 19th of July, and security costs outside of that area wherein SASRIA said the peril was in play was not covered. But that caused a lot of difficulties on claims. There was also on the retail claims, there was a lot of deflection in revenue, quantification issues. If you've got a Spar store in one town and you've got a Checkers store also, or a ShopRite store, the Spar store was burned down, and as a result of the Checkers store not being burned down, there was an increase in that store's revenue. So those deflection in revenue arguments and quantification problems was also difficult. On the construction side, as Themba said, the reinstatement was difficult, and particularly in some claims that I've been involved with was on heritage buildings. I mean, Pietermaritzburg, Durban area has got very old buildings. Those buildings were damaged, and you can't just go and replace it quickly because it's a heritage building. It takes some time to go and replace it in terms of the requirements of the Heritage Foundation. That was a problem. There was difficulties from the construction mafia. I've heard some accounts or experiences from colleagues and fellow loss adjusters where they arrive on site and the construction mafia is there with armed construction mafia guys are there to intimidate the loss adjusters, the insured, and the insurance companies to use them with the reconstruction and the reinstatement. That was very difficult. Overreaching by policyholders. I mean, there were some claims where the quotations or the bill of quantities to repair the buildings was just outrageous in terms of normal economical repair costs. Unpaid premiums. There were some claims where the brokers and or the agents did not pay the premiums over. That caused complications in the claims. There were some instances where policyholders tried to add cover during the period that the riots were ongoing. 2 days after the riots, they wanted to add some business interruption cover, or the net profit cover, or the working expenses cover. And then inadequate sums insured and the average. That always plays a role, not just on SASRIA claims, on all claims. It complicates reinstatements. If an insured is not adequately covered and there's average to apply, it makes it difficult to reinstate properly or quickly. That was difficult. The other one is, and that's also just a general difficulty on many claims, is inadequate information or slow information coming through, and it makes it difficult to finalize your reports, to report back to the insurer. And then the acceptance and use of technology. There are technology out there, and you can use tools to assist you, but it's not always readily accepted by policyholders, and there's a challenge in that. Other than that, I want to just again thank Sasria. I want to thank the intermediaries, the brokers that assisted their clients. And overall, my experience from these claims was that I think Sasria did a marvelous job in settling these claims, and it's world class. That's pretty much what I've got to say. I don't know if there's any questions, or we're going to leave it for a question and answer session later on.
Thank you so much, Renia, for that. I'm monitoring that Q&A chat. Just a reminder to everyone to pop your questions in the Q&A function, not in the chat box, because there's a lot of activity happening there. Please put your questions in the Q&A function. Just one from my side, Renia, you probably did touch on it a little bit, but as this was all happening in real time, claims are coming in from, all sorts of different directions. Some are underinsured, some don't have all the documents, and there's even some fraudulent ones that were snuck in there. I think you did reference that, but what was the most common challenge that you saw coming through of all the claims that you were sifting through? What was the most common or prevalent one that you and your team saw?
I think that the most difficult ones were the access to sites. It was difficult to get access to sites, to get all the information out of the policyholders, and also to deal with complex claims, policy cover issues. There was, I forgot to mention, one of the policy cover issues is the CBI cover. Sasria does not cover prevention of access, for example, and a lot of the policyholders claimed for fear of going somewhere. There might not have necessarily been damage to sites or to premises, but they feared going there, and then businesses lost money because people just didn't visit those places. And there's also stock shortages. To get stock for the businesses to restock themselves took some time. I don't think there's a particular one. Every claim has got a struggle or a difficulty, and it's hard to single them out. But policy cover issues, under insurance, inadequate sums insured, that plays a big role. Access to sites, this construction mafia was a big problem. Yeah, that's what I can single out.
And then, I don't know if this is a bit repetitive, but are there any specific policy structures or coverage gaps that maybe insurers and reinsurers can reevaluate? Should something like this happen in the future, touch wood, it doesn't, but to ensure a faster and fairer claims process, what is that one thing or two things that you could maybe say from a policy perspective?
Adequate sums insured, make sure that you're adequately covered. And work with the loss adjuster, work with the insurance company, provide the information as quickly as you can. That will alleviate a lot of delays and remove a lot of delays from the claims process.
Absolutely. Renia, thank you so much for that. On the capacity issue, you did say that we need to try and educate people about what loss adjusting is and make it sexy, especially to the younger generation. I think we're still trying to do that for the insurance industry as a whole, but certainly something that we need to do on the loss adjusting side. So thank you once again for those insights, Renia. I will be bringing you back a little bit later for the panel discussion.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. All right, so we are to our third and last speaker. We jump on to the panel discussion segment, which is going to be the last one for the day. And so our next speaker is Hayley Clark. Hayley is the Chief Actuarial Officer at Sasria. Just a brief bio on Hayley. She is a fellow of the Actuarial Association of Southern Africa and a chartered enterprise risk actuary responsible for actuarial services, quality assurance, and business intelligence at Sasria. She plays an important role in shaping the organization's preparedness strategy in an evolving landscape of political violence and civil unrest. Haley's talk today is entitled Resilience and Readiness in a New Era of Risk. Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Nani, and good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, thanks to Renier and Temba for your very interesting talks. Let me just share. And I trust everyone can see it. Otherwise, please do let me know if you can't see the presentation. But my topic today is to look at resilience and readiness in the new era of risk. I'm going to be focusing on this from a data point of view and talk a bit about what we're seeing in terms of trends and changes. And then I'm going to talk about what that means for Sasria in terms of things like our capital and modeling going forward, as well as how we're looking at this going into the future. Now, you may know that Sasria's key perils are terrorism and SRCC. So SRCC stands for the strikes, riots, and civil commotion. And I'm going to be talking quite a bit about this today because that's really where the July 2021 falls. So on this slide, we can see that the SRCC type events are increasing globally. It's not only the severity, but also the frequency of events that are increasing. In the graph, you can see the numbers of events, and then the table at the top shows the costs of the recent events, where we see there have been a lot of recent large events. It was actually stated in a Swiss Re article, which is actually the source of that table there, that said, it wasn't that long ago that no single SRCC event had actually exceeded $1 billion US, and that was the Los Angeles riots back in 1992. But in recent years, there have been so many different SRCC events that it's really become a prominent risk topic within the insurance and reinsurance industry. I will say that South Africa's, our losses ended up being at around just below 32 billion, and the economic losses were 50 billion. Now, as I said, the SRCC events are increasing around the world, and there are various reasons for this increase. So some being like the political polarization and economic inequality. But one thing that really stands out is having changed the landscape is that of social media amplification. So we've got platforms like X and Facebook, and they've played a major role in the organizing and escalating of riots around the world. I mean, if we look at social media, it really allows this mobilization of the masses at speed. And it also provides a lot of information sharing and inspiration in terms of these events and what can make the events escalate quite quickly, both within a country as well as through different international communities. I think the other thing that comes out from social media is the issue of misinformation. And that's quite a scary thing. And it's something we saw, it was around this time last year that the UK had riots, which took place on the basis of misinformation that was out in the public domain. Then, of course, we've got rising populations in so many urban areas around the world. So we've got more people as well as more assets, which leads to larger losses. And the other interesting thing is how law enforcement responses have also driven the increase in losses, because when you have these sort of militarized policing, it often does intensify the violence. So it's seen that we need to focus on a lot more community-based approaches to try and de-escalate issues that are happening. If we look at this graph, it's specific to South Africa, and it's the event trend or event numbers in South Africa since 1997 for the different types of perils that Sasria covers. Now, what we can see is there was very little up until around 2010, and then a huge uptick since then. It has been said that, we really need to look at what the root cause of protests are and address that. But sometimes it's actually a combination of many different things, and you have that final sort of spark that really just ignites the major unrest event. So a lot of things are bubbling underneath the surface. And unfortunately, all those things that are bubbling under the surface are still there that were there in July 2021. So things like unemployment, inequality, and poverty. So that hasn't changed. But what we know is insurance is really quite key in creating resilience and helping to pay out when things happen. The big challenge with reinsurance, and we see this not only for these types of losses, but around the world for other sort of nat cat major events, is after the events happen, immediately insurers try to reduce their coverage and also increase the pricing quite substantially. So very luckily, Sasria was able to continue to provide the coverage. And it's interesting, Sasria are one of very few pools around the world that provide the SRCC covers, in addition to terrorism, because many of the other ones are focused mostly on terrorism. So how do we build resilience into our current business when you've got many different interconnections between, the coverage that we're offering, the risk exposure, the pricing, the capital, and reinsurance? And that's something that we really are considering. We focused on a capital strategy for resilience, and Themba mentioned a little bit around this. But pre-July 2021, Sasria, we thought we were very well capitalized because based both on our internal view as well as on the solvency capital requirement. However, obviously then July 2021 happened. It was almost like a black swan event, and we ended up requiring recapitalization to the order of around 22 billion. And I will say that as much as Sasria do have very strong relationships with our key reinsurers, there was also a large contraction in the cover and a large increase in pricing post the July 2021 event from the reinsurance market. And we do have this challenge because reinsurance is purchased on an annual basis. So reinsurers can change their view of the risk from year to year. And that's something we really saw during the election year last year, where a lot of reinsurers sort of held back from providing cover because they were concerned about the risk. So as Themba mentioned too, we want to manage this fluctuating sort of capacity. And to do that, we need to build up our own funds to a very high level that can withstand any types of large events like this. We don't want to have to rely on the fiscus. So our aim is really to ensure that we continue to be sustainable, and our business model can be sustainable in light of this changing risk landscape that we're in at the moment. And at the same time, also as we, reinsurers and so recalibrate the risks, we also need to look at what these evolving risks mean for us with our sort of pricing, not just looking at the historical loss ratios, but looking forward at how the risk landscape is changing. We do see that globally there's been a move with other pools that cover things like SRCC and terrorism to use alternative risk transfer mechanisms, so things like cat bonds. However, they are quite novel when it comes to the peril of SRCC. So it's much more common in the terrorism space, particularly because the terrorism modeling is much better developed. And that brings us to the modeling of the risks, because key to understanding our risks is to understand what we call the probable maximum losses, or PML. And we're doing studies in conjunction with experts on this to try and understand what our losses could be. And that's not just the worst case loss, but the entire distribution of losses. So we can really use it to understand things like our pricing, our capital. And what we've done in the last few years is work on this, but the challenge comes in really knowing, is our PML accurate or not? Because as we say, pre-July 2021, PML studies were done, and ultimately it turned out that the loss was much more than what the PML study was showing it could be. Now, two parts to this. One is, it could be an underestimation of the PML, but at the same time, when you do a PML, you assume that risk mitigation will take place. And there was an assumption that the security forces would stop this type of event from happening, but they did not materialize fast enough. So in some ways, it was actually a failure in mitigation as opposed to an underestimation. Again, that then brings us to the question of the PML and whether you must then there's the chance of overestimating a PML. Because of that, you want to be quite conservative. But the challenge there is that then you can try and sort of tie up a lot of your capital and limit the amount of cover you can provide, and being able to expand your coverage where it really is needed. I think some of the main challenges that come from modeling sort of this type of risk is the fact that, as we see it, we've got what they call the spread or the contagion of riots, where they don't start in one particular point and spread outwards anymore. They really can sort of flare up in so many different places, as we saw with July 2021. There was no one single location. We've also got the challenge that it relies on human behavior. We're trying to model human behavior, which is exceptionally complicated. I mean, it changes depending on different sentiments, things like economic conditions, political triggers, social tensions, all of these impact that. So from a modeling perspective, it's not easy at all. And then there's also some research that's been done that says, post a massive event like July 2021, there might be less likelihood of a similar event taking place because it's still, you've got that memory, the communities have memory of the hardship that they faced following the event. And that means that your sort of frequency can move up and down over time, which again is very difficult to bring into modeling. So as I'm sure you've heard, the July 2021 riots were really a pivotal moment for Sasria. And there's been this whole rethink of, how we shift from being a reactive risk management organization to being proactive resilience planning organization. And Themba did speak quite a bit about some of the things that we're looking at, and I'll just briefly cover it again here, but we really focused on becoming data-driven. So we focused on trying to reduce the frequency and severity of any future events. Something that we talk about internally quite a lot is the movie Minority Report. And some of you may have seen that movie and remember it. And for those who haven't, really the gist of the movie is that there was a prediction mechanism to foresee a crime before it takes place. And then what would happen is it would allow Tom Cruise to swoop in and stop the crime from actually happening. So at Sasria, we plan to do the same thing. I mean, we want to use data, sentiment analysis, and predictive analytics to put in place these early warning structures and also partner with security forces to ensure that, where we see a risk coming up, it doesn't actually translate into a big loss event. And then it's also about having that deep understanding of the population, the demographics, and what is driving these underlying issues. As part of that, we do monitor a lot of the key issues that happen in the country, and this is just taken from Municipal IQ that follows and monitors all the different types of service delivery protests. It's quite interesting there. You see all the top service issues involved, and that's over 10 years, but the picture changes quite a bit over sort of 5 and 2 years. Over the last 5 years, the focus is very much on electricity, which is not a surprise at all, given all the load shedding that we had. But in the last 2 years, water is becoming a key challenge. So that is something that we continue to monitor and watch going forward. And then just finally, to touch on something a bit wider, is the fact that climate change, which is a massive topic at the moment, and conflict are very much interconnected. We see that these environmental stresses really can act as catalysts for social, political, and economic tensions. And I'm just going to give you a few examples around this so that you can, connect where we're coming from here. But one thing is there's been a big resurgence in activism around the world. And even though a lot of environmental organizations do condemn violence and really promote peaceful advocacy, there is a potential there for eco-terrorism becoming a thing. We also know that food security, which is very much linked to climate change, is also linked to riots. And that's this graph here where we can see, for example, the 2007 food price riots. They occurred in various places around the world, so from Haiti, Bangladesh, a number of places in Africa. And that was all following droughts taking place in some of the key food producing areas. So places like Australia, which weren't even, linked to the countries where the riots were taking place. At the same time, the Arab Spring was also in some ways connected to a drought and failed harvests, and then a large amount of rural to urban migration happened from that, putting a lot of strain on the urban areas. We can also see how transition risks through climate change can create protests, and that's around things like changing policies, for example, around coal, which can lead to large-scale unemployment and protests there. There's also a number of inequalities that arise through the main emitters being the ones who cause climate change, not being the ones that are suffering from their impacts there. So there's a lot of inequality that also happens with the potential for protests to arise. Then I think just in terms of how to manage that, around the world, we do see there are many examples of public-private partnerships with the idea that they'd work to reduce protection gaps. And often these these are through insurance and parametric covers. Sorry, I just want to check if you can still hear me.
We can, Hayley.
Okay, sorry, I can see someone is speaking. So these using parametric covers to cover the social stability. So an example that I'd like to give is the one of the Kenya Livestock Insurance Program. And what happened there was it was identified that there was a challenge where pastoralists' animals would lose their life during droughts, and something needed to be done there. But the challenge was the pastoralists were having to sort of travel further and further. And this was creating a number of territorial and ethnic tensions. So due to the climate issues, a lot of conflict was arising. And that's why this parametric type of cover was put in place with the idea that it would pay through either food, water, or monetary payouts to keep the animals alive and prevent the pastoralists from having to travel too far to try and keep the animals alive. So that's just one area where, you know, these types of public-private partnerships have been able to prevent these sort of cascading issues that can happen. And I will say that Sasria are looking at how we can work as well with these sorts of public-private partner sort of solutions in the future to expand coverage into these sort of areas that create quite systemic risks and impact social stability. And I think the next talk will go quite a bit into that. So I'm going to stop there and take any questions if there are.
Thank you so much for that, Hayley. I am checking the Q&A box. Okay, there's no questions at this time for Hayley. There are questions that have come in for Rania, but we will take those at the end of the session. So thank you once again for that. We're going to move right over. Okay, I have a question for you. There isn't one in the Q&A box, but I do have one for you. And maybe you did touch on it, but if you could just maybe expand a little bit on it, Hayley. So what you do there with your function at Sasria, leading the actual quality assurance and the BI functions, how are you integrating emerging risk intelligence, such as socio-political unrest trends, into the pricing models? I think you did touch on it, but maybe if you can expand a little bit on it.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the pricing between looking, and it always is when it comes to sort of actuarial pricing modeling, you have to balance between looking at what has happened in the past as well as how things are changing into the future. So, I mean, we do take into account historical data and historical loss ratios, the trends that we see there, as well as things like the PML studies, which are quite forward-looking, as well as what we see in terms of the changes in the market. So reinsurance has changed quite substantially in the last number of years following these major events. So it's a sort of combination of various different things that we look at.
Thank you so much once again for that. And we're going to move on to our panel discussion now. The theme for this panel discussion is closing the protection gap. How can the insurance sector respond better to a systemic social risks? That is the topic under which we're going to be talking for this panel discussion. And it's important to address this question because it highlights the vulnerability of individuals, small business and informal sectors that are either uninsured, underinsured, or excluded altogether from the conventional insurance products. So leaving them exposed to financial losses when disruptive events occur like the one we had in July 2021. And so it's important for us to ask the question of how does the insurance industry evolve to protect businesses and communities more effectively during future shocks like the civil unrest or systemic social unrest we saw in July 2021. All right, so to help us unpack this question and to unpack the issues a little bit more, I'm going to call on to the virtual stage my three panelists. So Rania Kruger is coming back. He is once again the director at Boyd Warwick International SA with first-hand experience assessing high-stakes riot-related claims. So welcome back, Rania. And then we've got Nkateko Maimele. She is the executive for claims at Sasria, a CASA and a leading authority in risk forensics and claims operations. And then lastly, we've got Pamela Ramachaka. She's the general manager for insurance risks at SAIA, a key industry figure in a policyholder coordination and a public-private engagement post-July 2021. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the panel discussion. We're just going to ask a few questions as we wrap up today's session. All right, so let's begin with today's discussion. And Nkateko, I'm going to bring you right into the discussion. From SASRIA's claims experience, what patterns emerged in terms of underinsurance or lack of cover during the 2021 unrest, given, the policy, the gap, protection gap discussion we're having?
Thank you, Noni. Good afternoon, everyone. So in terms of the SASRA claims experience, I think Temba has touched on quite a bit as part of his presentation. Renee also did touch on it quite a bit. So from a July 2021 perspective, we did note that the insurance losses were in the region of 50 billion. There are some stats that are suggesting as much as 60 billion. And what we ultimately settled on, it was in the order of around 31.5 billion. So with that, you can see that there is a huge gap between what SASRA was able to cover versus what the actual losses were in relation to the event. And looking specifically at the themes that we saw coming through within the claims space in terms of these claims. One, it was largely around the issue of cover, whether or not the clients actually did have adequate cover. We did see a lot of instances specifically in that case, and Renee also did touch on it in Temba as well, where clients were actually taking out cover as the event was happening. There would be a building that is burning down next door, and underlying insurers were getting calls from clients to say, I want to take SASRA cover. So the issue around timing in terms of when those covers were taken out would have obviously played a role in terms of how we looked at those particular claims. And in some instances, unfortunately, it led to claims being rejected. And then the other common theme that did come through quite a lot, and also just talks to understanding of the SASRA product, there was this misconception within the industry that SASRA cover actually follows the underlying policy, and therefore what that means is that SASRA would essentially mirror what the underlying policy says from a wording perspective, which obviously is not necessarily the case. We do attach to the underlying policy, but there are certain nuances or difference in terms of how the SASRA policy would respond versus underlying policy. So one of the things that we did see coming through was issues around extensions not being explicitly stated, and because of that, SASRA was not able to honor some of the claims in relation to extensions. And then the other one was from a business interruption perspective, just looking at the scale of the event, what was happening, the chaos. There were a lot of businesses that from a preventative perspective, and also just from a safety, they actually ended up deciding to close down their operations because it was not safe for them to reopen their businesses. So there was this assumption that SASRA, from a business interruption perspective, it would respond to the claim. But with our cover specifically, the BIA is not triggered until there is a material damage claim. So we did see quite a lot of those claims coming through, and that would have been a big driver for some of the claims not being honored. And then Renee also did touch on prevention of access, which is something that we exclude completely from a SASRA context. And then security cost extensions, that was also a little bit of a tricky one in terms of extensions in how we needed to treat that. Our view was there was a specific time limit in terms of when the peril was operative, but we did see quite a number of businesses wanting to extend it beyond that point. And how we dealt with that was that we put the onus back on the clients to demonstrate that the peril was operative beyond that particular period. So I think those were some of the things that led to the protection gap. And I think Renee did touch on issues around average and the challenges that came through when they were assessing the claims in that regard. But from a theme perspective, I would say most of it was in relation to that, and it really boiled down to not enough understanding of SASRA policy and how the policy is supposed to respond to a particular incident and event.
Thanks, yeah. Thank you for being thorough with that response. You kind of answered my follow-up question around affordability. And I think Temba did mention it earlier. People realize that, hey, actually, you know, it wasn't maybe so much of an affordability thing, although that may have been a factor, but it's sounding like it was an awareness thing, or perhaps an understanding of the policy itself, as opposed to affordability. But it sounds like it's a combination of things. It's a combination of things, certainly, that led to that big gap between, you know, the damage and what SASRA ultimately paid. But this helps us to understand. So thanks for that comprehensive explanation.
Yeah, maybe if I can add on that, yes, affordability not so much, but I think the issue around access as well, in terms of the ability to access cover, also based on our business model, there's inherent limitation in terms of who we are able to reach from a client perspective. So your smaller SMMEs that wouldn't prefer to have traditional insurance, they might have limitations in being able to access such a cover. So it is not necessarily affordability, it's an issue of access, and then obviously the issue of awareness.
Yeah, and awareness and the product design limitation, and as you're saying, for the smaller SMMEs. Pamela and Renia, I'm going to invite you to weigh in on the systemic causes of the protection gap, perhaps weighing in from an insurance loss adjuster perspective. If you haven't already commented on this previously, Renia, maybe Pamela, you can go for this one.
Thank you so much for this engagement. I think it's quite important to have it. SAIA is the trade association for the non-life insurance industry. So SASRA would be a SAIA member. And when we talk systemic risks for our industry, we're talking to a risk that affects all insurers and all reinsurers. So it becomes one of those risks that become uninsurable because it's affecting the entire market. So what SAIA, we try and deal with these industry issues from that kind of a holistic perspective to see how we can partner with government to try and find a solution. So, for instance, SASRA was started by the industry and eventually belonged to the state as a 100% state-owned company. So from a non-life perspective, what we cannot maintain, contain, sustainably ensure, we will try and find solutions to what they would call a market failure, to try at least to keep the country resilient. So, for instance, we're looking currently at climate change and weather-related events, because they too are becoming systemic, drought being right there, foremost, flooding, and so on. So we as SAIA, we've engaged National Treasury to try and see if we can find a solution to the systemic risk, and we have modeled it a SASRA model. So you want to create more SASRAs that are looking specifically at very focused risks. So you're able to manage those risks with that kind of focus, and obviously injection of capital and so on, and support from a distribution perspective from the market, which is us, the non-life insurance industry, to support adaptation of that particular or access to that particular coverage. I think I'm getting a bit preachy, so I'll stop there. But just to close off, systemic for us, it's quite dangerous because it means it's affecting the entire market, which means it's close to becoming very uninsurable for the market to sustainably insure.
And then maybe just sticking with you, the concerns that you're expressing here, you know, are we seeing meaningful product innovation in this non-life insurance sector, especially around social unrest, business interruption, or political violence, which is important given our discussion and what happened?
Yeah, so SASRA, the mandate SASRA has is very focused, as I mentioned before, because there was a market failure previously in terms of ensuring rights, strike type of material damage events or business interruption following material damage events. So you need to look at these risks, as I mentioned. If they're systemic in nature, you need to look at the risk specifically and see what you can come up with as a product offering or as a solution. So, for instance, climate-related events, we've just recently been allowed as the industry to be able to insure using a parametric solution. So parametric is not your indemnity type of a solution. It's very much, there's a trigger or a proxy that's triggered, and you, according to whatever geographic area or spatial area that you've insured, you would pay out without having to see if there's a loss or not, or whether the loss is 100% or 50% or 60%. So there's a lot of basis risk that sits with the insurer because they don't see what they're insuring to start with, other than to say we're insuring livestock or we're insuring area yield if it's crop. So, and we use a lot of satellite information, we use a lot of data, and our reinsurers have got vast experience in that space. And so we're looking forward to engaging more with the government from a one thing about a parametric type solution is it needs scale. It needs a lot of numbers for it to be commercially viable for our insurers and reinsurers to participate in. Therefore, if you really want to create a resilient country, for instance, you want to create resilience in the emerging farmers who are currently not catered for, because current insurance, traditional insurances are expensive, especially drought. It's expensive for every farmer in South Africa. Then you need to have a partnership type of arrangement where, government comes forward with something, private sector comes forward with mechanisms, whether it's infrastructure, the way it processes claims, the way it pays out claims, the way it collects premiums. That kind of mechanism being in play in partnership with government makes a beautiful formula in trying to create our own solution to whatever risks that we're faced with. Specifically systemic risks.
Nkateko, I was going to ask you if there's any sort of innovation pipelines or pilot initiatives within SASRIA outside of what Pamela has referred to. Is there anything that you can maybe enlighten us on in terms of what SASRIA is looking at in terms of innovation now?
Thanks, Nani. Probably not as exciting as the parametric index-based solution, but maybe to also pick up from where Pam has left off, as she was saying that these risks by their very nature, they are systemic, and SASRIA being a member of SAIA is also quite involved in the considerations around what needs to happen, especially in the climate space. There has been research that was commissioned through external parties just to look at some of these protection gaps. And then there is also a view around where SASRIA could potentially play a role in this particular space, specifically from the perspective that SASRIA is a state-owned insurers. All of these systemic risks ultimately do have an impact on government as well. So from a government perspective, there is a lot of expectation in terms of where SASRIA can come in. It might not always be about us providing the cover, but also being able to be an advisor to government on some of these systemic risks and also the solutions in that regard. So that would be one of our involvement, just looking at what Pamela was talking to. And then now bringing it home specifically within a SASRIA context, one of the things that was touched on a little bit earlier, I think it was Themba specifically, was because of the aftermath of July 2021, we had to discontinue the excess of loss products, the wrap cover, because there wasn't enough appetite from a reinsurance perspective, and also issues around for it being affordable for us to retain. We had to discontinue it. But now we are closer to a point where we're able to reintroduce the wrap cover product to the market, because there also has been a lot of concerns from the market to say that 500 billion rand limit, million rand limit that we currently have on the primary coupon is not sufficient. And if you recall the table that Themba showed when he was looking at the top claims, you'll recall that there were claims that we had to pay that were in excess of 1.5 billion. So there was that constraint in the market. So we are doing the work to be able to bring it back to the market going forward. Themba is doing all of the work in preparation for that. And then he's also touched on the policy wording review, and I think that was also quite necessary for us to relook at the cover that we intend to provide to the market versus everyone's understanding of the cover. And then the second part that would be linked to that will still come, it's part of the pipeline, is to also do a gap analysis and benchmarking, that if you compare Sazra's product, the wording from an SRCC and PVT space, to what is happening in the international market in terms of covers, is it comparable? Is it like for like? What are the gaps? What are the differences? And that will also inform things that we need to think about and look at going forward in terms of a product offering in the long run. And then with what Hayley has spoken to from a data intelligence perspective, once we get to a point where we're a lot more comfortable in terms of the quality of the data, that will also inform some of the thinking that we are thinking about around, for instance, security cost extension cover, because one of the challenges that we do have with security cost extension, one is to be able to confirm that there was an active peril. So once we get to a point where we're scraping a lot of data information around what's happening around the country, we are also able to inform the clients, and also from a claims perspective, we can get to a point where potentially we can be proactive in terms of how we manage security costs, and then we don't have a situation around disputes in terms of when the period started, when the period ended. We've got insights on how long that activity was happening in that regard. And then we touched on the SMME space. So here there is still work that we need to do to have a better understanding. And I think the biggest challenge is the issue of access to this particular product, looking at the profile, and also, as I said, that we do rely a lot on the underlying insurers, and generally they don't necessarily have an appetite to play in some of those spaces. So it's things that we are looking at, assessing the viability of it and see if we are able to offer that, and then the outcome of it will determine the way forward. And then also in terms of, we spoke about the perils are the perils as is, but we are also exploring the need to offer other cover outside of the peril, but obviously with that it will require mandate changes and all of that. So that's very, very long term. It's not something that is going to happen in the immediate period. So there's still groundwork in terms of trying to understand all of that and readying ourselves from a regulation perspective.
Rania, let's bring you into the conversation. We are running out of time, so I'm just cognizant of that. We're just going to ask a few more questions before we close. You spoke earlier on about some of the challenges around handling these, riot-related claims. You may have touched on it, but how did you go about managing client expectations and the insurer pressure during these high, volume disaster situations? Just very briefly.
Sure. It's always a challenge because there is, because of the volume of claims, things, loss adjusters are inundated and it takes longer. So I think it's to try and, to the best of your ability, try and keep everybody up to date on the progress. That's all you can do, really. I mean, or one of the main things that you can do. And then, yeah, the other thing is capacity. I mean, we must, as an industry, try and if there's a catastrophic event like this, try and increase the capacity to alleviate the pressure on the loss adjusters and the claims people dealing with the claims at the insurance companies.
Absolutely. I think that the open lines of communication, I mean, it's such a simple thing, but it's so effective, right? Pamela, let's bring you back into the conversation. We know that collaborative frameworks played a key role in enabling interim payout and fast track solutions. We saw how quickly the claims were paid. We heard that 80% of them had been paid. So what do you think made these business collaborations successful in 2021? And how do we sort of clock build or institutionalize that cooperation for future crises?
On the basis that Sazra as a model is an excellent predecessor in terms of how we can do it well when we do it together. The industry is the distribution model for Sasria. And with the industry, it's got long teeth in terms of what it's been doing it for a long time. So it knows how to do it in terms of compared to all other jurisdictions and also mostly in Africa. So it's about where do we find more opportunities? We are faced with another crisis, which is climate change. The question is, how do we come together again and create a similar model? You know, government is talking about, or National Treasury is talking about disaster response financing, and it's putting insurance at the heart of it. I think that's a good way to go, to try and get all these players that know how to do in terms of playing where they will play well together, and then together we create a model like Sasria that works well. So we can do it. We've done it before.
Thanks for that, Pamela. Nkateko, if you can briefly, I've got one more question. Just on how Sasria, talk around Sasria's engagement with regulators and partners during that period, just very briefly.
Yeah, thank you. So I won't go through everything. Themba has touched on the relationship between us and the agent companies in terms of how we dealt with the claims. So that would be one part of the engagement. And then from a regulatory perspective, the PA was also quite supportive with Sasria, but obviously with that, we needed to demonstrate one progress around us being able to settle the claims, and then also our ability to be able to secure capital. As you can imagine, July wiped up all the reserves, all reinsurance capacity. We were technically insolvent. So there was a keen interest around plans, measures in place to be able to come back to solvency levels. So initially, from an interaction with the regulator, there was a reporting requirement that we needed to give them an update weekly as they got more comfortable around the progress. It moved to monthly, and then over time it moved to quarterly up until we were out of the woods. And then also obviously the role of SAIA in being able to facilitate us being able to work with the underlying insurance companies, giving them the mandates to settle claims on our behalf.
All right, and then just maybe one last one for you, Nkateko, just sticking with you. How is Sasria thinking about incentivizing risk mitigation in its pricing models? I'm not sure if you touched on this, or its underwriting decisions.
Not directly. So as Haley would have said, we are on a journey from a data perspective and also just the business model that we're operating, that historically we didn't know who the client was up until claim stage. So therefore it also makes it challenging to be able to bring in those sort of incentives and making underwriting decisions. But once we get to a point where our data journey has matured, it's things that we are going to be incorporating. But there are also clients, very few clients, we call them multi-claimants, that we look at internally, and part of the assessment, the underwriting and the pricing is also trying to understand what risk management, what risk mitigation measures does that client have in place, and that also then has an impact in terms of the ultimate pricing that we would give to those clients.
All right, thanks. Thank you for that, Nkateko. Then last question for everybody, but let me start with you, Rania. What does future readiness look like for the insurance ecosystem, from reinsurance structures, data readiness to loss adjustment capacity?
Thank you very much. I think Haley will probably be best to answer the reinsurance aspect, but from a data perspective, I think we've moved along quite far. I mean, we're having a webinar now, whereas pre-COVID, we would have had a physical meeting or a seminar so that in itself is quite a lot of progress. But there's a lot of data that's available. There's tools, technology tools that we can use in loss adjusting and in the assessment of risks. So I think we are not there yet. I think it's a progressive sort of development of tools and technology and data artificial intelligence to assess these risks and to deal with these risks. So I think we're just going to have to be up to speed with that and try and upskill ourselves to the best of our abilities. In terms of the capacity for loss adjusting, I think it remains a problem. I mean, there's loss adjusting industry in South Africa is shrinking. I mean, but we have got programs. We are now working with the Insurance Institute of South Africa, for example, to take in some candidates and work with them to upskill and to train loss adjusters, and hopefully that will bear some fruit and there will be a steady increase and to fill the gap.
Thanks for that. I think it was one of the questions in the Q&A box. So I think you've addressed that one. And then maybe I want to bring Hayley in on this one because it is, I know she's not on the panel, but just on the data side, Hayley, are we doing enough to invest in local talent and data tools for faster response? I mean, I'm interested in your response on the data side in particular.
Yes, I think on the data side, there definitely is a lot of excitement in this area at the moment. I think a lot of people are going into that sort of at university level and becoming, I mean, especially with AI and predictive analytics type of thing. So I think there's a lot of skill which we're starting to get in that area. And I think it also links to what we see in the insurance industry where data is becoming more and more important. I mean, a few years back, I mean, insurers, and not just for us, but all insurers would just have their data by a Cresta zone. And now we're seeing insurers actually geocoding all their risks. So there's more data out there and more people getting involved.
Maybe some closing thoughts from you, Pamela, and Tateko before we just wrap up.
Just to say that our country is well positioned in terms of the institutions that we have. I think we do have the political will. I've seen a lot of documents that have come out. So I think in terms of managing our own systemic risks, I believe we're moving in the very, very much, right direction. And it's all currently driven by National Treasury. So we're looking forward as an industry to engaging the National Treasury further in terms of, other systemic risks that are not catered for.
Thank you. So from a Sasria context, I think it's quite evident in the discussions that we've had today that one, there has been a lot of valuable lessons that we've taken from July 2021. And our effort as part of our 5-year strategy is really building that resilience as an organization, and really to also then highlight that Sasria's resilience also has an impact in the broader economy. So be it the things that we're doing from a data risk intelligence perspective, and also the other area maybe that we didn't talk to so much this afternoon is also from a CSI perspective, because we understand what are the drivers that ultimately lead to protest within the economy. So what is our contribution, or how can we play a pivotal role in terms of alleviating all of that? We won't be able to solve everything, but I think our contribution towards all of that does play a critical role. So we are moving beyond philanthropy in terms of CSI, and also making sure that we are impactful in terms of the initiatives that we play in that particular space. Thanks.
Closing it off nicely for us. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, everybody. A big thank you to all of the experts and our panelists for sharing their insights so openly. They truly were invaluable, and we appreciate each and every one of you. A big thank you to Sasria, who has sponsored today's session. Without you, it would not have been possible. So a big thank you to Sasria. And of course, a big thank you to our attendees for joining us today for this first webinar in the Insurance Master Webinar Series. Thank you for joining us. And then just regarding your CPD hours, if you have stayed till the end, you will get your full 2 CPD hours. It does take approximately 2 weeks to process that and have your certificate sent. So Sian and Co and the team will be in touch with you in about the next 2 weeks to send your certificates to you. And then just regarding today's session and the Insurance Master Webinar Series, which was brought to you by Insurance Biz Africa, We will be having more sessions coming up, so just stay tuned and look out for comms from the team. They'll be sharing more details about that in future. But for myself or Noni, it's been an absolute pleasure. Have a great afternoon, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.